Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Philip Martin, Senior Investigative Reporter for GBH Center for Investigative Reporting. Callie Crosley has the night off. Tonight, domestic abuse and sexual violence during COVID. We, like you, are dealing with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and are taking precautions. We are working with limited staff, and our guests are joining us remotely. President Biden, during his address to Congress, spoke about the need to renew and pass the Violence Against Women Act, the 1994 law that protects and provides resources for victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence. The president championed the law when he was a senator. These forms of abuse, along with other types that we will discuss, largely go unreported. And with a deadly pandemic in which many people need to stay at home, those abused women and men of color may feel trapped with no place to go or the ability to seek out help. Joining me to discuss, Reverend Traci Jackson Antoine, Director of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Project at the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts, Keturah Edwards Robinson, a nurse practitioner at the Dimick Center in Roxbury. She is also a specially trained sexual assault nurse examiner responding to trauma emergencies at several hospitals within the greater Boston area. Zoe Flowers, an advocate, activist, and domestic violence expert with more than 20 years of experience. And Letitia Adams, a retired Boston police sergeant detective who during her career worked in the domestic violence, homicide, sexual assault, drug and human trafficking units. She is also a consultant with the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts on the topics of domestic and sexual violence. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me start with you, Keturah. During this pandemic, it's been reported that there have been many cases of domestic violence and abuse. What have you seen with your own eyes?
So as a nurse practitioner at the Dimick Center, I've definitely seen an increase of cases of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And what you said earlier, highlighting how many of these Black women or women of color don't have the opportunity to escape their current living situations because of the pandemic. Same thing with emergency housing and emergency shelters, they're at capacity. So even resources are limited for particularly these women. As a sexual assault nurse examiner for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, at the height of the pandemic, there definitely was a drop in people who were presented to the emergency room for reporting acts of sexual assault or sexual violence. And I think that that could be contributed to just the fear of, at the height of the pandemic, knowing that the hospitals were at capacity. I think that's what kept a lot of people away. But as, regulations laxed and, media and the government is letting us know that they're relaxing a lot of restrictions, the cases have gone back up to the same for before the pandemic.
And what you've described, of course, is what you've seen with your own eyes. But the thrust of this program, of course, is we also realize that a lot of these cases are going unreported. Zoe, you have seen many cases over the last few years yourself. We looked at one stat, of course, between 2005 and 2010, that the disproportionate number of those affected by sexual abuse and violence are women of color. Can you talk about that, and how do we address the fact that so many of these cases are not being addressed publicly? They're not being talked about. They're not being reported for fear and other reasons.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you again for having me, Mr. Martin. So I think the reason why these cases go unsupported is, Black women aren't really supported so often in our own community. We're not believed when we speak up. Some of us stay silent because we don't want to be looked at as traitors to the race, so to speak. And so a lot of us find ourselves wanting to protect the people that are choosing to use harm against us because of instances of police brutality and all of those things. And so, one of the things we know is that Black women in particular, if we do fight back, so to speak. We face higher prison sentences. And so the court doesn't believe us. Our community doesn't believe us. Sometimes our families don't believe us. And so we stay silent because we get the message early on that, Black women identified people's lives don't matter as much as other folks.
Reverend Traci, let me ask you this question. Zoe just pointed out this supposition, which in fact is accepted by a large part of society, whether consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, that Black women's lives and Latino women's lives matter less. What has been your experience in working on this issue in terms of addressing this issue of worth and the issue of who matters?
Again, thank you so much for having me. I agree with my sister 100%. The Domestic and Sexual Violence Project at the Urban League was founded for that very reason. I was doing domestic violence and sexual assault work for a small national organization. But what we were finding over time was that there was a huge gap in services for women of color. They were the highest number of reporting to the Boston Police Department, but yet when we checked the demographics of other mainstream organizations, we realized that those women were never being served. So they were reporting, there was an initial report that took place, but then there were no follow-up services. So I think what matters most is that we find services that work for women of color. So the project at the Urban League, the Domestic and Sexual Violence Project, is a culturally specific project. It is funded by the Office on Violence Against Women, and it is funded under their culturally specific grants. And so what we endeavored to do was to create a program that would improve outcomes for African-American victims and survivors within our inner city. And in doing so, we created programming that looks like services that we need, right? So we brought African-American men and women together and we surveyed them, and we had learning communities and said, if you access services, what would those services look like? They had to be services that were provided by us because we understand the cultural norms and all of the nuances of our people. So that's exactly why the project was created, and that's why we've been doing the great work we've been doing for the last 7 years.
Now, of course, there has been, some of these cases involve police responses. Some of them, again, as we've talked about, are people simply don't know about. Letitia, let me ask you, how should police deal with this issue of domestic violence? And the reason I ask that question is because obviously over the years, we've seen a police response that's resulted in actually persecuting those who have been abused. We've seen a police response where individuals, where you have, rather than de-escalating a situation, have escalated a situation. And that, of course, has been the center of much of the concern around the country in terms of the relationship between police and communities. How should police deal with domestic violence, and are they properly trained to deal with sexual violence, especially within communities of color?
Well, it's the policy of most police departments around the country that incidents of domestic violence will be recognized and responded to as criminal activity. And consistent with state law, the arrest of suspect is presumed to be the preferred response to domestic violence incidents. Now, of course, in the institution of this procedure, it's understood that it will not cover every conceivable situation that may arise, and there may be a particular set of circumstances where arrest would not be the appropriate response. But when officers respond to domestic violence incidents, they take whatever steps are necessary to, or they should take whatever steps are necessary to ensure the safety of everyone on scene, including themselves. Obviously, these are very dangerous calls for officers as well as the victims, because they're characterized by a lot of anger and frustration and really intense emotions. And and as far as the victims in the dual arrests, and I think that's kind of what you were talking about. Dual arrests are strongly discouraged when it comes to domestic violence situations, because we know that it increases the danger to victims and it trivializes the seriousness of domestic abuse.
Is that in general, or is that we're talking specifically about Boston and other local police departments? Are you talking about a general policy?
I'm talking about a general policy, yes. where dual arrests are strongly discouraged. We don't want to re-victimize the victim. So we do our best to identify who the dominant aggressor is when we respond to calls. And that's not always possible, but in most cases it is. There are steps that are followed to determine the dominant aggressor. But if it's not possible, then a dual arrest in some cases will be made.
Now, panelists, let me ask you this question. It's been said, and we've talked about this at the very beginning of the show, of course, some victims of domestic sexual abuse are men. We're working here at GBH on a series dealing with that very issue. But the vast majority, of course, are women. What onus do you put on men? What do you basically try to inculcate, basically try to teach men in terms of their relationship with women to prevent sexual abuse and violence in the first place? All of you are experts, so please, let's, whoever would like to opine, please. Let's start with you, Reverend Traci. Go ahead, Katura.
Sorry.
Please.
What I was going to say in regards to the SANE program, we recognize that survivors of sexual violence are the spectrum of genders. So our ultimate goal is to just provide trauma-informed care, regardless of how the survivor identifies, and we support that mission by having continuing education, yearly certifications for all of our SANEs.
Reverend Traci?
Yeah, similarly, we recognize that, anyone can be a victim of violence, right? Regardless of gender, race, class. We are endeavoring to provide support for whoever needs it. And so I think that there are a lot of things that we're trying to teach around the education of men. We are really trying hard to inform men about the importance of being allies, right? About the importance of supporting women who are victims and survivors. Most men can identify with a mother or sister or niece or a girlfriend, somebody that matters to them. So when, they're thinking about the see something, say something kind of what we hope people will do, I think it just makes sense that we include men in this work. And the way in which we engage them, however, is important, right? Nobody's going to show up to the table if they think they're on the menu. So we have to be careful how we navigate that. And one of the ways in which we do it is working with faith communities, right? Because Pew Research says 86% of Americans identify as people of faith to some capacity. And that can be a very broad spectrum from I go to church every week to, I go to the mosque once a year, whatever that looks like. We have an important opportunity there to engage men. And if we can engage faith leaders who are so tremendously influential in their communities, then we can bring men along in this journey with us to support not only women, but other men who are victims and survivors of domestic and sexual violence.
So Zoe, what's been your experience in this regard in terms of basically creating an educational model for men, primarily, albeit men can be victims of domestic abuse and violence and are, a preponderance of the cases involve abuse of women. What's been your particular set of experiences dealing with males as perpetrators and educating them subsequently?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So for the past 20 years or so, I've been working with an organization called A Call to Men, and they do work specifically on gender socialization. And one of the things that Tony and Ted, they're the founders, Ted Bunch and Tony Porter, and one of the things that they say in their conversations is that if you only have this amount of men that are creating the violence, right? But how is it that they're able to do so much harm with all of these other men that are not violent? And so their work is really with the larger group of men, which people used to call bystanders, but now some of us say upstanders, right? Because we don't want people to stand by. We want people to right? So their work is really on gender socialization, male gender socialization. And I think it's great, the way socialization works, the way it's the same way oppression works, sexism, et cetera. Men mostly listen to men. And so we could see it in the conferences that we've done with them, where I might get up and I might be saying something, and even women as well. Women listen to men and men listen to men. That's the way socialization works. And so I might say something, and then the minute I turn it over to Tony or Ted, it's like, we call it delighted attention. It's like everybody stands up, everybody listens, right? And so they do a lot of talk about how we are socialized, because men don't just transmit culture, women transmit culture too. And so much of this has to do with how people are raised. One of the things we know is that abuse is linked to rigid gender roles and rigid gender stereotypes. And so they do the work to help us think about how we're socialized so that we can think differently.
In other words, it's hypermachismo that we've seen, sadly, exhibited in music as well as in other ways in which people are inculcated. Letitia, I realize that you are now retired, but how basically do you believe the police departments could use more resources to address issues of sexual abuse? I ask this question, of course, in the context of Biden, President Biden now asking for expanded funding to deal with sexual abuse, of violence, protection of women, some of that which would go to programs run by police departments. How would that money be used, or should be used effectively in your view?
Well, I believe that education about and awareness of domestic violence is critical. I know the Boston Police Department currently has training where officers are taught to understand or trained to understand the dynamics of intimate partner violence, but I think it needs to be expanded to include, and they do have some, but there needs to be more inclusion on same-sex violence.
The money can be used to create more effective programming.
Yes.
And what's lacking now? And I could ask other members of our panel too. What do you think is lacking at the moment in terms of official responses? We have responses from the Urban League, for example. We have various nonprofit organizations addressing this. There seems to be a disconnect, however, when you have police departments dealing with this issue. What has been your experience? I don't think that's just a presumption on my part. I think we've seen that statistically, that there's been an uneven sort of response to sexual abuse and violence. Qatar, what has been your experience in that regard?
I mean, specifically with communities of color, I think the belief is that when they come to if they go to the emergency room to request our services, that there is an automatic link to the criminal justice system. And that's why I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be on the show today. That's sort of a PSA that you can go into the emergency, you can go into a local emergency room requesting a sexual assault kit and examination by a sane nurse, and it is not linked to the criminal justice system if you do not want it to. And also understand that the statute of limitations on your evidence that is collected is 15 years. So you have time to, go through that journey and surround yourself with support so that you can make that decision if you even want to seek criminal action or legal action, and just understand that the sooner that you present to have that evidence collected, the more likely that we will find evidence that can support your case if you choose to pursue legal action in the future. With the caveat, however, that if you are under 18 years of age, we are mandated reporters, so we will have to file a 51A, and that will go directly to the DA. And it is at their discretion how they pursue what they do with that case, and other vulnerable groups include the elderly and people with disabilities.
Thank you very much. Reverend Traci and Zoe, as I mentioned before, the Biden administration is now is pushing legislation, hoping to supplement existing law that protect women. What do you think can be done or should be done? What should they be basically focused on in terms of resource development, the administration? And what are you hoping for that the administration might provide that will seep down into local communities to protect women and men victims of sexual and domestic abuse?
There are a couple of things, honestly, Mr. Martin, I'd like to see happen. I would like to see a lot more of the resources that are poured into our communities support culturally specific work. Because the one thing that we know is that mainstream service providers, though well-intended, oftentimes don't meet the needs of specific cultures, right? So I would like to see a lot of that money poured into training and education programs for communities of color. But I also think it's really important that there are cultural competency training services that are offered throughout our community to first responders. Because it's one thing to be a first responder, but it's a whole nother thing to come with a cookie cutter approach that may or may not address the help-seeking behaviors of African-American men and women. As my colleague Letitia said, oftentimes when the officers arrive on the scene, what they're looking at from a woman of color and assuming, that she is the victim, she may not present the way you think she ought to. She might not be cowering in the corner crying. She might be fighting and in fight mode, right? And it doesn't mean she's any less of a victim. It doesn't mean she's any less in imminent fear of her life. But what she is in survival mode, right? Because that's what we're taught. And that's how we are, as women of color, that's how we are oftentimes stereotyped as being angry Black women. I've been in plenty of courtrooms across the Commonwealth with victims and survivors who are being told by a judge that they need to express that they are in imminent fear for their lives. And when the victim looks at the judge and says, I'm not afraid of him, but there is a knife under my pillowcase and a bat beside my bed. Well, that is imminent fear. But if you don't understand the culture or the language, that's not what you're hearing. It's 100% what I'm hearing. And I'm sitting on my hands, or I'm sitting with my student attorneys from Northeastern trying so hard not to intervene and say, that is imminent fear, So I would like to see, I've had the opportunity to address the California Judicial Council, 350 judges, to talk about cultural relativeness and cultural sensitivity. I've had the chance to present to the White House. I've been in so many spaces and places, but there's so much work yet still to be done. And so I'd like to see resources pulled into cultural competency training, education, sensitivity, so that when women of color and men of color show up, those that are first responders understand the help-seeking behaviors and know how to respond.
That's quite a list, and it's and Zoe, I assume you would share some of that wish list, if you will.
Yes, I was on mute, or you would have heard me, Reverend Tracy, co-signing over here with you.
Amen. Amen.
But so you covered all that, right? So what I would say is I would love to see more going towards the arts, right? Yeah. I've done all the training, I do all those things, but I'm also an artist. And one of the things that I have found is that through my art, it touches people in non-confrontational ways, and it invites other people to the table. And one of the things that I would say as a storyteller is, we need more resources going to the arts, because the arts is critical. One of the things we know is that most of the things we know, how to move through the world, how to respond to people, how people present, we got through Hollywood. We got through people who not live like us, a lot of times do not like us, do not understand us. And so a lot of the images and the ways that we have been presented to the world are to Hollywood, and of course before, during enslavement, during Jim Crow. But again, that was media. So, the ways we are portrayed are deeply ingrained. The stories that people hear about Black people, Latinx folks, a lot of times they've gotten through the media. So we need to redress that so that we can see ourselves differently, reimagine ourselves. And people talk a lot about hip hop and all of those things, but we know Billie Holiday, all these people talked about, my man beats me, I love him too, all these things. So
well, yes, you're right. There's a focus on hip hop, but of course, this spreads across all musical forms where you see misogyny, like front and center, because quite often it sells. Look, I want to thank all of you, and I'm just wondering, within the next minute, and that's all we have, if you could just sum up in a sentence, what do you like to see happen in terms of the focus on sexual and domestic violence in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Reverend Traci, please.
Again, Mr. Martin, I would say let's pour our resources in where they're needed. I co-signed my sister's comments about the arts and how important they are to us and for us. And I would also say in the education of faith communities, because we know the faith community is really large in African American and Latinx communities. It is the center of who we are. So I would say pour more resources also into training and educating faith leaders so that they too can become first responders and part of the larger coordinated community response. And that way that victim is getting wraparound services and everybody they encounter is saying the same thing to them about the importance of their safety above all else.
Thank you, Reverend. I appreciate it. This has been an important topic, but this is the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. Thanks to all of our guests, and I'd like to thank you for joining us. Stay with us as we continue our conversation on Facebook and Twitter.
Let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. "27 years ago, I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to be authorized now, will close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. It's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America.
That, of course, was President Biden during his address to Congress, urging them to reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act. We are on Facebook and Twitter with our post-show, continuing our discussion on domestic abuse and sexual violence during COVID. And you have to ask the question that if you had a loophole this huge, this large, were we really serious as a nation in dealing with domestic and sexual violence in the first place? I mean, the loophole is massive. And so I'm asking our guest if we could, if you would address this issue. It's not just this loophole, it's also a question of resources. And we've talked about some of that. And so I'm wondering, if you could pick up where the president basically left off in talking about unexplored, or rather porous areas within legislation or law that has allowed domestic abusers to abuse in numbers that are still extraordinary.
I mean, Mr. Martin, it's like you said, it's about money. So the SANE program is funded by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And you wonder then why not enough community health centers or just local groups are not aware of our services. When in fact, we do education in OBGYN departments and local college health centers, but we know we need to do more. But our resources are limited, and as a line item on a very long budget for an entire state, it's going to be our representatives that give us more, that help support us with more resources. That's a call to the community to also talk to your representatives and make sure that these services that that are needed in our communities, specifically communities of color, are being addressed.
The Urban League, of course, Reverend Traci, has, as you point out, has been at the has basically worked on this issue for a long time, along with other non-governmental organizations. How would the Urban League utilize more money, if you will, resources from the Biden administration in terms of reaching men who abuse and women who are abused?
Thank you for asking that question because, as you stated, the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts is the only Urban League affiliate in the country with a domestic and sexual violence project. 7 years ago, when we started this project, the Office on Violence Against Women deemed this project necessary and replicatable. And it has been their fervent hope that this project would be replicated across the country by other urban leagues. So I think additional resources for us would mean a lot of things. It would mean that we could provide technical assistance to other urban leagues in other parts of the country who endeavor to do what we're doing, right? It would mean that we would be able to not only support them in grant writing and in training and education that would give them the capacity to do the work. It would also help our CFO, our VP of Finance, to support them in managing financial federal dollars. Many organizations don't have experience necessarily managing federal dollars. And when you talk about projects specific to the DV and SV work, that grant management even looks different than other federal dollars, right? So you need the capacity to handle those resources. But we also would be able to enlarge our existing program, right? We would love to have a project on engaging men, right? We would be able to work with a call to men who I've worked with in the past, who I absolutely love them. I would love to be able to bring them here to do some more training for us. I would like to bring Dr. Oliver William, who I serve as a consultant for him and his team. I've been working with him for the last 7 years and 16 or 17 other folks around the country that we all do the same work in this African American Domestic Peace Project Consortium. So I could bring those folks here and provide more training on a larger scale. And we could provide more services. You know, we would hire more staff. We would have Zoe come work with us. We'd be doing all kind of stuff. So yeah, resources would mean we would enlarge our capacity. We would stretch our tents and our courts, and the safety net would be cast much farther for victims and survivors in our city.
And, you know, I was thinking about also something that Zoe said about culture and art. I was in Harlem obviously before the pandemic. And if in Harlem, if you walk along Amsterdam, there is an exhibit of paintings on the street paintings, faces, profiles of women. Black and Latino women, I don't know if you've seen this, who have basically been victims of fatalities, of sexual and domestic violence. And it's powerful. And so art and culture, and music, poetry, everything is certainly a powerful factor in how we deal with this. Zoe, have you talk about some of what you've seen in Boston that already exist and that might be supplemented with additional funds that basically speak culturally to the issue of domestic and sexual violence?
Mm-hmm. Well, I am not a native to Boston.
No problem.
I'm a neighbor in Brooklyn.
Oh, Brooklyn, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I can talk about what I've seen in my work. So I have a play called Ashes, and it's based on work that, you know, survivors of domestic and sexual violence that I interviewed, and we turned their stories into what's called a choreodrama. And what I saw in our performances, we've had 60-year-old men stand up and in the debrief and say, I'm realizing I was sexually assaulted by my babysitter. You know, I've had people come to me privately after the show and say, oh my gosh, I think I might be a perpetrator. And so the art just speaks to people in so many different ways. Even if you look at the work of Eve Ensler, the vagina monologues, you know, art just does something to people. It just opens people up in a different way. And it healed me as a survivor of both domestic and sexual violence. You know, I started this through my poetry. I couldn't talk to people, but I could write it down. And so, you know, I just think that the arts is just overlooked in the mainstream for what it has the possibilities to do.
Indeed,
as far as
indeed. Now, of course, we also know that sexual violence is not the only type of horror that occurs within some households. Reverend Traci, can you talk about, and I'll ask our other panelists to also opine, the other types of abuse that occurs within households that perhaps are not addressed as forthrightly in the sense of actually talking about it as sexual abuse?
Well, there are many other forms of abuse: spiritual, financial, psychological, emotional, verbal. Most oftentimes we understand physical and sexual most clearly. But what we don't oftentimes is realize that those other more subtle forms of abuse are building up to a more overt form of abuse. When I'm training advocates across the country, I often say, no one will generally punch you in the face on a first date, right? There is a grooming process and a period of time in which someone is trying very hard to make you comfortable before they are overtly abusive. If I were doing a safety plan with a victim or survivor, I might ask them questions and things like, including, has he threatened you? Which might seem not so important, but in reality, that threat is really a rehearsal for what is to come. So oftentimes I would say, well, what has he threatened? Because that's what we need to be concerned about, right? We need to be concerned about what he's threatened, because that's what he's building up to. And so I think that, there are a lot of things that happen in homes. But you know what, if you grow up in most homes of color, you grow up with the understanding that what happens in this house stays in this house. And unfortunately, it is that kind of communication or lack thereof that causes the abuse to work so well in African American and Latinx communities, and not just in households, but also in church houses, right? My colleagues and I coined the phrase the holy hush, because domestic and sexual violence is the one secret everybody will keep in the church. We won't keep any of your other business secret, but we'll keep that secret because so oftentimes nobody wants to confront an abuser. So, I say that to say that there's a lot of work we still need to do. We could all do this until, we're old women in wheelchairs, and it still wouldn't satisfy all that needs to happen in our community. So, but I'm excited that we're here having a conversation. Every step of the way, I say this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. We've got a lot of work to do, but we're always chipping away at it and bringing information. So thank you again to all of you for the work you do, but to Basic Black for giving us this platform.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
Katura, one thing that, of course, many folks talk about are warning signs, warning signals. When you see women, perhaps men, to a lesser degree, but certainly that's real, come into the clinic and come into DMIC, what do you look for that basically signal to you that something is wrong?
So it's just like Reverend Traci said, it's those more subtle acts. So the verbal, financial, spiritual, that I'm looking for when I'm in the room, when I'm in an exam with one of my patients who are primarily women, since I work in the OBGYN department. And it doesn't come out right away. You have to build a rapport with that patient. And I think it does take training. I'm fortunate at being specially trained as a sexual assault nurse examiner that I do have that additional training. So when I am having a conversation with my patients and they say something that just doesn't sound right, like, oh, my partner made me feel guilty about a decision that they made, especially when it's around their own body or their own health, that for me is an alarm bell to let me pay a little bit more attention to this patient and dig a little bit deeper. Cause like Reverend Traci said, they're not going to punch you on the first date. So it's a buildup. And that is primarily what I see in the community.
You mentioned, both of you mentioned financial abuse. I don't think this is something most folks would think about but you could also see why it would be a powerful punch, if you will. Mm-hmm. Not physical, not sexual, but it's a powerful punch when, especially when you're dealing with so many women of color who don't have means. And even if you did, you could see the financial issue being held as a form of extortion within relationships. Zoe, I assume that that's something you've also seen as you've surveyed this landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whether it's the person who's choosing to use harm being in total control of the finances. And so where can the survivor go if she or he doesn't even have access to bank accounts, if they don't even know the bank accounts? There could be secret accounts. And again, I'm so happy that you brought up the financial pieces, because these are things that we just don't look at. And then also, of course, there are people who also, engage in substance abuse. They engage in sex work, and their abusive partner can, actually force them to go out and do that work, And so there's lots and lots of education that the general public needs about what domestic and sexual violence actually looks like.
You actually raised something that I was going to ask each of you to elaborate on. As you may know, I've done a lot of work here at GBH on human trafficking. And can you connect the dots between sexual abuse and domestic violence and these other forms of abuse, these other forms of trauma, and human traffickings of women of color, primarily Black and Latino women? Couture, if you could start. And of course, there are Asian women who are also abused, as well as Native American women, white women.
Absolutely. What we're finding is that the women of color who are engaging in sex trafficking, they're falling through the gaps, because as we already discussed earlier, just that the stereotypes around women of color, particularly Black and Latino women, about being the strong woman or the angry Black woman, or just this idea that we can't be victims. And I think that just perpetuates that misinformation. And unfortunately, the larger part of victims in sex trafficking are women of color.
And you see a direct link, Reverend Traci, between the abuse and trauma suffered by these women and perhaps them being prostituted.
Oh, absolutely, I do, Mr. Martin. When you think about people who are victims of trauma, what ends up happening is that anything that doesn't heal, that's not properly addressed, creates for an individual the propensity to be a victim of trauma again. And so, if you broke your leg and never had it set, never went through all the proper channels to heal it, and, perhaps physical therapy, that break, though it may heal on its own, will always leave a place or a space of sensitivity and the likelihood that you will re-traumatize it again. And that's oftentimes what happens is that very oftentimes victims and survivors, when we sit down with them and have conversations, we find out that they have lived and existed under layers of trauma, but they've existed under trauma they've never been able to talk about. If God forbid your mother dies, she only dies one time. But for victims of domestic and sexual violence and human trafficking and other forms of trauma, they live under multiple layers of trauma, so that they never really have a chance to come up for air and recover, right? So they are always in survivor mode. And so therefore, everything that happens to them subsequent to that initial trauma for them just becomes almost something that they not only do they experience it as being their normal, but they don't know how to find their way out of that. And so when your mother dies, somebody shows up at your house with the macaroni and cheese and the chicken and the baked pies, and we nurture you and take care of you. I'll pick up the kids from school and I'll drive them and all that stuff. They don't get that. They have to keep silent about what's happening to them, and nobody shows up to support them because everything that's happening to them is a secret. And so, that is one of the frustrations, I will say, of this work, is that oftentimes when we look at our judicial system, there's so much frustration over the ways in which victims of human trafficking, sex trafficking are handled, because nobody goes back and looks at the trauma that got them there, right? Nobody goes back and examines all the things that happened before this moment that may have gotten them to this place, and that maybe if we'd healed some other things along the way, we could have done something different if we'd intervened sooner. So, again, so much work to be done. And
we're putting a graphic up here right now. We want you to give a call to the resources that we provided on this program. Write these numbers down. Basically, don't be silent. Don't whisper, as Reverend Traci here says. say it out loud, get the help that you need, and also the help that others need. These are the resources for survivors. And finally, with our panelists, let me ask you also if you take a minute to talk about some of the resources that you provide, starting with you, Keturah.
So as a sexual assault nurse examiner, as I mentioned earlier, a survivor of sexual assault or sexual violence can present to, there are actually 7 local emergency rooms in the greater Boston area that include Newton Wesley Hospital and Crane Bridge Hospital. All of these can be found on the mass.gov website, where you can come in and have a trauma-informed forensic medical exam, as well as evidence collection. What we also provide are prophylactic treatment for sexually transmitted infections, as well as HIV. And so what that means is, regardless if you have, if we know that you have an infection or not, we provide the medication to prevent. And I think that's important, as well as emergency contraception for the prevention of unplanned pregnancy.
Zoe?
So my organization is called Soul Requirements, and it's broken up into 3 parts: educate, inspire, and entertain. And through the education piece, I do domestic violence training, sexual assault trainings, childhood sexual assault. I also do racial equity trainings for domestic violence shelters, domestic violence coalitions, et cetera. And through the inspire aspect, I actually am a healer. So I do hands-on healing with people, whether it's Reiki, meditation. I do healing retreats for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And then through the entertain piece, that is where I have my plays such as Ashes. I also have a book called From Ashes to Angel's Dust, A Journey Through Womanhood, where I actually interviewed survivors of domestic and sexual violence, all of whom are women of color. And there are resources in there. There are healing techniques and hotlines and all of those things. So those are just some of the resources that you can find.
I'm hoping that after the pandemic, perhaps your play will be, we could actually see it. You think that might happen?
I'd love that. Bring me to Boston. Actually, I'm going to be working with Jane Doe in a couple of months for their national conference, but I'd love to come to Boston. You all have been standard for as long as I've been in the work on domestic violence. So I would love to work more closely with y'all.
We'd love to have you. Love to have you here. You know, you can meet all the panelists one-on-one. Reverend Traci, yourself, talk about the resources that you're providing.
So I have the great fortune of sitting on the board of directors for Jane Doe. And so I'm a board member for them. I'm a board member for several other domestic and sexual violence agencies across the Commonwealth. I am a trainer and educator. And so I spend a lot of my time, including this afternoon, I'm going to be training in Detroit, Michigan for about 3.5 hours. So I do a lot of national as well as international training and education. We do provide direct services at the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. And so, victims and survivors are always welcome there. In addition to domestic and sexual violence resources, we have all kinds of resources: rental assistance, utilities, food, you name it. We endeavor to bring all of it because, again, it is about a holistic approach. I also serve as a reverend at Morning Star Baptist Church. And so you can always access me there for services related to DVSV or just spiritually. And so I'm here, and I'll continue to be here for as long as it's necessary until we see real change happen in our community.
Well, thank you. But another important question I should add before we sign off is, what can individuals do? Those who are basically, what can a person do if they know someone is being hurt but refuses to get or seek out help? What can that person do? Keturah, starting with you.
Well, what I will first say is be present. Be there for that person, because I'm sure they're already feeling isolated and that they have no one to turn to. So the last thing you want to do is to be another person that turns your shoulder to them or doesn't give them the ear. And just be there, because more than likely at some point they will be ready to seek help. And that timeline shortens by knowing that they have someone there who will support them and will not judge them and will, like I said, just be a presence. And I just wanted to go back to what we were speaking earlier. I was covering over the Boston area, but the same program is for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We cover 6 regions, over 100 and, we have over 150 SANE nurses, and we work